Good afternoon. Thank you for waiting for me. All right. As you are familiar with the school where we study and teach, I I live in the town just south of the school, and it took me 30 minutes to get home. All right, so thank you for waiting. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see here, get your names down. And if you guys could help me out as far as what we have and what we have not covered, and remind me, I would be very appreciative. Right. So thank you for attending, and we're going to try to get you caught up. And I'm always trying to remember everything that it's on the test, the subsequent test, so you can do well on that. Right. So I believe I have all your names. Um, Now I'm guessing that we have at least, right, done the first two topics. Let's see here. That is Native Americans. And let's see here. Do I do the Spanish colonizers next, I believe? So to give some context to the Spanish as they colonized. So have we done the Black Legend?
Yeah, that was assignment 2.
Okay,
And
great. Now, did I have a number 7 argumentative section on that contended that Mexican Americans are a mestizo people?
I believe the assignment 2 was just the same as the first, to pick a section and analyze it, and then find the supportive data and argue whether you agree with it or not.
You got it. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to jump into the Southern colonies, but before I do, if you don't mind, because I did not, it's all about how many classes you're able to have. I always want to give you 4 to 5 days for every assignment. I understand that you have lives, you have other responsibilities, and so I never want to cram in a number of assignments that necessitate you doing them just in 2 to 3 days. I think that's a little bit unreasonable. So I did not assign the English colonizer. However, I just want to briefly go over the thesis here, okay? Because I believe there's just one question on your test pertaining to such, okay? So, but also those who aren't here today, I'll not only put this online, but I believe we will dedicate time to go through the study guide uh, while you're preparing to take your test. So we'll have a second chance to go over this question. Okay. Yes, Max and Jacob.
So I wanted to point out that there are two assignments for last week that were graded, but it was the same assignment, except one of them had the section 7 that you were just referring to.
Oh,
So we
yes.
went ahead and only, I think most of us only submitted the one that was in the modules page, but then both
Yes.
of them are assigned as graded.
Yes, that's so strange. What's so strange about it, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I got quite a few messages from that. The strangest thing, right, is I posted the Black Legend without, because I literally have just written that number 7 section on the Mexican mestizo heritage. And so at any rate, I finished writing it and I thought, you know what, I might put a question on the test, just one, on the first test on it. So I want to make sure they're familiar with it. So I'm going to change, I'm going to erase, I'm going to delete my Black Legend, and I'm going to put it on again with number 7 attached to it. And when I did, I went to student view and it only had the newer one that I put on. I thought, okay, great. I fixed it. I deleted the old one and I put on the second one with the additional number 7 section. But from your messages, I see that that wasn't the case. But it's so crazy because not only when I get on as the instructor, but I have the option of hitting the button student view. and it's supposed to be what you see. And once again, it was only the second one that was available for my purview. And so it's the strangest thing. I know that you guys are telling the truth because many of you are claiming this, but I can't find it on my end. So it's the strangest thing. With the exception of when I go out of modules and I go to assignments, then I see that there were two different submissions. And thankfully, everyone that submitted into the first one that I intended to erase also submitted into the second one. So I was able to finally, from the site of assignments, take out the first one, and everyone had the second one submitted. All right, so I apologize for that. That was the strangest thing. Like I said, on my end, it's very easy. I hit the dots on the end of the column, on the end of the row, and it with a right click, and it gives me the option of deleting it, and then I just add the new one. And to this moment, I don't know how that happened, and I don't know how it wasn't evident to me when I hit student view. So I'm very sorry about that. And but I like to think everything's okay, like I said, because everyone that turned in to the first one also turned it into the second one. So I have everybody's. I don't believe I lost anyone's work. So thank you for improvising on that. And I'll just try to be sure to be right the first time around, so that doesn't happen again. Anybody else? Jacob, Max?
Oh, yeah. So I only noticed that second updated assignment today, and I only submitted on the old one. So should I resubmit that, and will there be late
Oh,
penalties?
no, of course not. Of course not. No, no, that's one thing for sure. I mean, to me, that's an automatic policy. If I make a mistake, you're not ever going to be punished for it. So no, if you don't mind, please submit it to the second one. I'm going to send an announcement when I'm done here, and asking people to do such. Everyone to submit to the second one, and I will not acknowledge any late submissions.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Max. Absolutely got it. And technology can be really hard sometimes.
Yeah, no, I'm Generation X, man. I'm getting old. I'm getting old, and it's tough. I have I receive help just simply posting these videos because I have to go through YouTube and they have to approve it, and they do the subtitles for it, and then once that's downloaded, then I can put it on there. So I'm receiving help just with that simple process. So thank you for your patience. Okay. So on this one, okay, it's pretty upfront, is it's Whig history. Okay. The Whig Party, WHIG, were the liberals of the English Parliament and political system, and well, British for that matter, also Scottish and Wales. But at any rate, they what they were hoping for, right, was they were hoping for the gradual. When I say gradual, right, because the British law was organic; it grows like a plant. They don't have one definitive constitution like we do. They follow precedents by way of decisions by judges, laws passed by Parliament, executive decrees by the king or queen, and it just kind of synthesizes into a tradition of precedents and new changes, etc. And that is the kind of complex form of English common law. And so I believe it's pretty similar. They still do that now. So at any rate, what the Whigs wanted is they didn't want any violent upheavals. They were hoping that organically, through decisions and laws and decrees, that society would become not only more democratic. And remember, the demos just means the common people in Greek. So like the more and more the common people having a political voice to be able to politically participate, but also increase the degree of personal independence or autonomy, as they say, as far as the individual's rights, protection under the law, and liberty. Okay, so at any rate, they saw history in that pattern, and what they were proud of is they held that England was at the forefront of that global movement, that global evolution toward a more democratic, egalitarian, freer society. Okay, so with Whig history, that's what they do: is they look back and they look for exceptionalism, right? Instances in which the English, in particular, were at the forefront of that evolution. All right. I remember, as I mentioned here at the very top, it reminds me of the Sonderweg thesis of the Nazis. Sonderweg, I guess, just means special path, and people try to look back and find a neat narrative historically in Germany of them acquiring and practicing the attributes, the ideology that would make them open to the German National Socialist or Nazi Party and form the Third Reich. Okay, so they look at characteristics like blind obedience to authority, anti-Semitism, militarism, uh, 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 no toleration of dissent or disagreement, etc. Right, and that's what the Whigs do. They're looking for a special path that the English have had toward greater liberty. All right, so notice what I have here. Right, to me, this is kind of the heart of what I have, and I'm going to post this. Okay, and I'm going to post it, and I'm going to probably include it on my announcement and remind everyone that it's just for you to peruse and study for one question on the test. It's not an assignment. Okay, well, like I said, I didn't assign it. But I have here, Whig historians must somewhat cherry pick convenient data that matches and supports an image of a liberty-loving English tradition and people. Nevertheless, that such data exists to cherry pick lends at least some degree of credibility to their narrative. All right. So you start, the basic narrative usually starts with the Celtic people. Okay, and they're tougher to find a lot of detail on, although there are quite a few classical sources. You have Strabo, Tacitus, Plutarch, lots of Romans and some Greeks wrote on the Celtic people, but not they themselves. Okay, so we're relying upon these classical chroniclers who just kind of observed them in war, etc., and wrote about them. So at any rate, there's a famous Agricola book on the Celtic people in England, okay, in today's England. And so at any rate, it was called Albion by the Greeks, and it was called Britannia by the Romans. So at any rate, the Celtic people, you can find evidence for them being quite decentralized in their tribal organization. And you also have evidence of a very fierce determination not to be colonized by others. So you had Queen Boudica, you had what was his name? It starts with a C. Queen Boudica, and where is he? Caractacus, who have famous anecdotal stories that basically they shared the characteristic that they would literally rather die. They would rather die than be colonized by anybody. And they said that they were fighting for their freedom. So English historians, Whig historians love that. That goes right in with their Whig thesis, right? So I apologize, I didn't get anything juicier than that on the Celtic people. But then next, right, you had the Romans, and what they normally do with the Romans is you could highlight the fact that when the Romans came in, they did add some of the Celtic British especially who intermarried with the Romans, because the Romans, right, when they captured Britannia, and they received colonies, right, veteran colonies, land and the forced labor of the native indigenous British people to work for them as a reward for their military service as Romans. And a lot of them came single as men, and so they married and had children with Celtic British women. And so some of these biracial unions had biracial kids who were allowed a Roman education, who were allowed to participate in the tribunes, And as you probably know, the tribunes in the Roman Republic were popularly elected by their area, their districts, if you will, and they kind of served as like a House of Commons or a House of Representatives for us. Okay, but instead of highlighting that, right, the Whigs, what they kind of do is they kind of dispel, and I'm saying that I've come across about three famous Whig historians, and they all three of them they just say, well, they discount it and say the Roman influence was next to nothing. They weren't there in Britain very long. It was never a high priority. By the 400s, when Rome was falling apart, Britannia was the first place that they evacuated with their troops to come back to Rome and defend Mother Rome. And so, and it's followed by, as you're probably familiar with, like with the famous story of King Arthur and so forth, it's followed by the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes, right? And they came from Denmark, Belgium, and Schleswig and Holstein, between Denmark and Germany, and of course Germany, right? And they were Germanic culture, Germanic language, etc. And it was mainly, by the way, it was mainly the Saxons. When you look at kings and kingdoms in England as well as back in Germany, the Saxons seem to have been more numerous and more powerful than the Angles. So at any rate, they came in the 400s, and there were virtually no Romans left as far as the soldiers to defend Britannia. And so they were rather successful rather quickly in taking over southeast and then eastern Britannia or England. And of course, there's evidence that they were quite libertarian. Again, they had very decentralized system of organization in lots of just hundreds of different tribes in their local areas, and they had something close to like the English notion of hundreds, villages of 100 people, semi-autonomous, having their own court system, their own legislator, like kind of a city council, if you will, with an alderman and a sheriff. And so they had that, the Angles and the Saxons, and it was known as the oh gosh, was it the Witten? The Wittengemot. I have it here somewhere, darn it. But at any rate, yeah, it was right here. Yeah, the Wittens and the Wittengemot. These were democratic bodies, and they had local autonomy, and then they had regional Wittens, and then they had like one big body of a Wittengemot for the biggest, largest kingdom and king. Okay, so they did help participate in governing, and they were supposedly chosen by the people. Okay, and so yeah, you find some evidence that yeah, some of these people that conquered England and the English Celtic people themselves were highly decentralized. So that lends to the assumption, right, which could or could not be true, that they were very kind of libertarian, right? Remember, libertarian is that government don't tread on me, right? You're distrustful of big centralized government, and you want to keep things decentralized for philosophical reasons. You want to keep your government closer to you and hence more accountable, and smaller with fewer resources and weaker deliberately. So at any rate, you can find evidence for that among the Celtic English and now amongst the Angles and Saxons. Okay. However, with economics, right, it's tough supporting Whig history with economics because early on they formed pretty much a feudal economy, right, whereby the lord, the king of the empire, all land was his, and you held it of the king, whatever land you had, and you had vassals who worked for you. And now you did, however, with the Angles and Saxons, and maybe some people think this is taking it too far and bringing too much symbolic importance to it than there really was meant to be. But it was contractual, and so the vassals, of course, had to defend and fight for their lord with their very lives. They had to provide their own arms. They had to provide a segment of their crop and harvest to their lord. But the lords, right, supposedly amongst the Angles and Saxons, they promised not to abuse their power. They promised to protect their vassals. And so there was a little bit of a sense of accountability within this feudal system. Okay. But still, it was very inequitable. The barons, the dukes, they ran the show. Okay. And so that doesn't necessarily lend itself to Whig history. And so we just kind of skirt over that part. Okay. And then the next group were the Danes. And I didn't say much on the Danes. They were more difficult to find. And everybody says the same thing. When I say everybody, I mean the three sources I read, is they contend that the Danes were quite content with allowing the English to keep their organizations intact. Land ownership, they didn't change much with land ownership. The Angles and Saxons did. They confiscated land as the conquerors, and there was quite a change, but not so much with the Danes, these Vikings. So they come in, right? And notice they also had something similar to the Village of 100 with its own court and its own legislator. And that was the Wapentakes. And I'm sure that's not how you say it. But this right here, if you wanted to look that up, it's supposedly for the time period. And we're talking about like the 700s to the 900s AD, that they were rather democratic, participatory political bodies that the Danes represented and were okay with. And also, right, they not only kept the English establishment intact with land ownership, with titles, but also, of course, with law, right? And not just local legal institutions like their hundreds and their courts and so forth, is they had a dual legal system. The Danes did. So the Danes in their sections lived by Dane law, and the English lived by English common law. And so, the Whigs will point to that and say that, that was rather anomalous, out of the ordinary, that, you're colonized by these Vikings and they allow you to stay pretty much sovereignly separate with your own political system and everything virtually intact. And of course, with exceptions, you had to fight for them on call. You had to do public works for them on call. Okay, that goes without saying. But then also by this time, right, between the 700s and the 900s, you have the development of cities. Because London, right, the Romans burnt London to the ground and rebuilt it, but it existed already. So you're talking like the time of the Druids in the Celtic people, evidently, with the establishment of London, very old city. So you had a few, right? But supposedly you have the development of quite a few more towns or cities, right? And they had a Latin phrase that translates as "citiaire makes one free." Okay, because oftentimes people were escaping their feudal dues, or they had legally escaped them by performing all their duties and paid their way out of the contract. And so people would come for more freedom, autonomy, and economic opportunity into these cities. Okay, and they had something, right? I couldn't find there had to have been a Latin term for it, but I just could not find it. But with the Spanish, the equivalent in Spanish are the fueros, Fuero. And I can't help but think that, like fuera de algo is like outside of something, like you're exempt, you're outside of the confines of the normal law. And the same thing here during the Danes' rule is with these new cities, they started getting the towns started having a semi-independence where they were not held by all the same laws of either the Dane laws or English common law. And then also, right, you're going to have at this time by the 900s the reestablishment of a money-based, a coinage-based economy. And they're by the 900s, they're already getting in touch better with the Mediterranean trade. Of course, nothing big yet, like with Asia and so forth, that as will happen during the Renaissance. So at any rate, trade burgeons, it grows, and you have the development of a bourgeoisie. And a bourgeoisie, it just generically just means people in the city, right? But the classes that are usually associated with it, the urban middle classes, are the artisans, the skilled workers, the merchants, the traders, the entrepreneurs who start their own businesses, and the who else? The creditors, the bankers, the lenders. Okay, so now that you have the development of these cities, they are kind of starting a precedent of kind of breaking free from mercantilism. Because remember, with mercantilism, the crown assumes that there are finite resources, and he or she gets to dictate the allocation of those resources, right? So absolutely nothing like capitalism. But now, right, you're having a breaking away from that in the cities where people are usually free to do their thing economically, okay, without having to get the proper papers and the proper monopoly from the nobility or the king. So you do have that at the time of the Danes. And then you have the takeover by William the Conqueror in 1066 and the Normans. And Norman is a misnomer from the name Norseman. They were from Norway. They were Vikings, and they had by the end of the Merovingian dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire in France, the Normans took over almost all of France, but especially Western France and the region of quote Normandy. So at any rate, they William the Conqueror had ties to the crown through intermarriage, had ties with the Danish crown, and he died without an heir. And so they began a civil war in England to decide who was going to be the next king. And he invaded in 1066 from Normandy, France. He and a large army invaded southeastern England, and he is going to prevail. It's going to take him about 10 years, almost exactly 10 years. And he's going to prevail with the Norman conquest of England. But once again, you do have some evidence at the time of the Norman rule. Economically, it doesn't tie in well with Whig history. Again, the Normans confiscated property. They had strict feudal dues that were owed to them, etc. But they did have something like a privy council, a group of nobility who advised the king. And what's going to happen by 1215 is they're going to demand that they do more than advise the king, that they have to approve of what the king or queen passes as law, as an edict. Okay, so that's going to kind of mesh from something like the mere privy council, who just advised the crown, to something closer to a parliament. Okay, so at any rate, you have the Norman conquest, and economically, it's not egalitarian at all. It's not capitalistic at all. But again, politically, they allowed English common law to prevail. They allowed local autonomy to continue to exist. And like I said, they had like a privy council, and then at different levels, they had legislators as well. So they were not necessarily very centralized, very tyrannical, as you might guess in the Middle Ages. So then I get into specifics, okay, that support the Whig thesis. So you have here the Magna Carta, which just means the Great Charter, right, in Latin, in 1215. Article 20 forbade the king from excessively fining subjects for small offenses. Article 39 declared trial by a jury of your peers. And yes, they said your peers constituted people of your same socioeconomic strata, people that did the same thing for a living as you, were in your same class. Article 40 claimed equality of legal protection under the law for all. That's huge, right? Political equality under the law. Everyone is to equally be protected in their rights. Whereby the king was prohibited from breaking English laws. Hence, the rule of law, not the rule of the crown, not the rule of man. Okay, so that was pretty big, the Magna Carta in 1215. But yes, was it run by the noble barons? Yes. Did they primarily have themselves in mind and their own kind of balance of power with the king? Absolutely. Were they a bit kind of like demagogues? and that they tried to manipulate the masses to support them and claiming to be the heroes of the people against a tyrannical King John? Absolutely. That also was a part of it. But the Whig historians just choose not to get into that kind of detail. Okay. Then you had the English Civil War. Charles I, he claimed divine right to rule. And time and again, he was a bit careless with his expenditures. One case in which people were infuriated, well, he helped pass the uniformity laws. Everybody had to be Anglican in denomination. They had to be Anglican in their liturgy and how they worshipped and how church services were run. They wanted everything run by uniformity. The bad guy on this was William Laud, Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, England. And he made it clear that his motives were not religious at all, that they were political. He wanted to enforce uniformity because it was better, it was more effective in keeping dissent away and political control for King Charles. Okay. So at any rate, you had the Puritans and the other nonconformists who were furious about this. They began to be arrested and even martyred, and that just helped increase their cause and their popularity. Okay. And then also King Charles, because you had the Reformation that was not even 100 years old. Well, about exactly 100 years old, actually. At any rate, King Charles sent some of his army, unbeknownst to Parliament, to fight the French Huguenots, the French Protestants, in alliance with the official French Catholic troops of Louis the 13th, I think. And so at any rate, that was not popular because England popularly was very much in favor of the Reformation and becoming Protestant. So at any rate, he was confronted by Parliament and he dissolved Parliament, said he had the power to dissolve them and rule by himself. And that was the beginning of the end. And so they began to meet, kind of like the third estate of the French Parliament when they met at the tennis court and said they're going to meet illegally and informally, and they're going to be the nucleus of a new government of the people, kind of like that with the French Revolution. The English House of Commons began to meet secretly and to garner more and more support from the Puritans and other opponents to King Charles I. And it's going to evolve into a civil war. And the Roundheads, many of whom shaved their heads, it was part of like a movement to get to the simplicity and asceticism of the New Testament of the Bible as Puritans. They did not like the way that King Charles I and his cavaliers, his nobility, were into extravagance and luxury and all that, and ostentation and all that. So it was symbolic in shaving their heads. But the Roundheads, for Parliament's powers, prevailed. They won. They captured King Charles. They had the House of Commons had a trial for him, declared that he had broken English common law and traditions. He had no power to dissolve Parliament, and they beheaded him. They had him executed. And so that was a big statement for the rule of law and for the participatory role of Parliament as elected by the people. And of course, it's just the House of Commons, right? That's elected by the people. The House of Lords are handpicked as noblemen, the upper house. And then in 1688, finally, you had the Glorious Revolution. And that was James II, very similar to Charles I, claimed divine right, fought against Parliament, was never satisfied with the amount of money that he kept demanding of Parliament to raise through taxation. And so he had drama and he left England to continental Europe, and they declared that he had forfeited his throne by leaving the country. And they declared William of Orange of the Netherlands and Mary to marry each other and to become joint sovereigns. However, under the condition that they defer to the power and the sovereignty of Parliament. So now this is the beginning of the King or Queen of England just, waving in the parades and not being the real power behind the throne. Now Parliament is coming out as the primary source of sovereignty, the primary source of the authority of government and its right to rule over the people on account of it being elected by the people. Okay. So when you look on all that, right, yeah, you can, if you cherry pick, you could find evidence of kind of a special path, if you will, kind of a pattern or a legacy of kind of a liberty-loving intolerance of tyranny, demand for political participation by the people, in England. Okay. But again, like I said, they conveniently overlook other stuff, instances of tyranny, instances of economic oligarchy of a few people, enjoying the wealth at the expense of the many. They just kind of conveniently overlook that data. And then, of course, right, they to be so exceptional, right? Remember, Spain was in multiple kingdoms. It was highly decentralized. They had cabildos or city councils and alcaldes mayores or mayors that were elected. The Spanish had the right, as a town or a village, to declare, "I obey, but I don't comply," and it's almost like a form of civil disobedience. If the king had ordered them to do something that was against their conscience, or against what they believed to be Spanish traditional law and custom, they could say, "Sorry, I obey, but I don't comply," and not carry out the king's wishes. And then, like I mentioned, the cities in Spain had the fueros. They had a name for it, where they were outside the purview of the king's power in many ways. So, just how exceptional the English are, I don't know. But I thought I'd give it a try because it's a very popular historical narrative. Anybody have any comments or questions? Right. So now, southern colonies. Let's see here. All right, so hopefully everyone can see this okay. You were going to have a movement by the 1600s that is perfectly in line with the colonization of the Atlantic coast, right? Whereby the old mercantilist system is going to begin to fall apart. I don't know about fall apart because it's going to still be there 100 years from now, but it's there are cracks in it. Okay, there are cracks in it. So you see here, right? Parliament began to, make demands and grow in power, and then the bourgeoisie tended to increasingly run Parliament, at least the House of Commons. Okay, and this happens quite often, right? Is you get an independent middle class that develops, and they chase after their socioeconomic ascendance, which we call the American dream. And once they get economically more comfortable, and they begin making political demands. They just seem to go hand in hand historically. So you have this middle class of the city become empowered economically first, and then they began making demands politically next, right? And they hated the monopoly system because a lot of them were what the nobility would snobbishly call parvenus. A parvenu is like a Beverly Hillbilly. It's someone that was not born into wealth, was born into a poor blue collar family and background, and they made something of themselves, like a self-made man, and rose up within that one generation. So they're nouveau riche, right? So at any rate, there is going to be quite friction between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, because the House of Lords, of course, they were not elected, and they were nobility, and most of the nobility was tied to a seigneurial economy. And seigneurial means most of your wealth was in land ownership and in your ability to command the labor of other people on your own land. Okay. So kind of the old school running the House of Lords, and this new parvenu class of city running the House of Commons. So they're going to be at odds with each other. And but laws have to go through both, right? To be passed. And so you have here English Stuart kings, the Stuart dynasty. That's just the name of a last name of a dynasty. You had the Tudors, then the Stuarts. English Stuart kings like James I often felt obliged to at least partially cooperate with Parliament when they became strapped for funds. For instance, James I obliged Parliament's promotion of overseas trade and colonization, provided that the private colonizers spent and risked their own money. And of course, that should sound very familiar. Remember, we mentioned that with Ferdinand and Isabella, this kind of almost Darwinian, brutal, almost capitalist system that opens up, right? Anybody who's willing to risk his life and his own money to go conquer and to go colonize will not only be allowed, but will be even ennobled and be given certain status and political and economic rewards. Okay. So at any rate, Paul Johnson says that right off the bat, and for quite some time during the colonial period, the colonies were labor scarce. Okay, and so because of that, right, the leverage went with the workers. They were no dummies. They're like, okay, you need me to work. What are you going to offer me? And so right away, right, wages in North America were oftentimes quite higher than wages back in England and Britain. Okay, so that was another thing that's kind of growing. And then, of course, right, you have opportunities for oh gosh, what was funny? They used a euphemism, adventurers, for people who would invest money in a joint stock company. Okay. But of course, they're not adventurers, really, literally, because they're staying in England. They're not risking their neck, but they're just giving money to the company, right? And whatever percentage of the capital, the money to start with, that you put in, that's the percentage of the profits that you get, right? So, what if you have no money? Well, you could be like John Smith, the famous guy of Jamestown, and say, you know what? I will risk life and limb. I will come and do the dirty work of colonizing, beginning to find some form of revenue and profit, and bring it back to bring it back to the country of England. And then you will treat me as if I had invested a certain percentage of the capital, right? And I think he started off at like 8% and it got into double digits for the amount of work that he did. So he didn't put in a penny, right? But he was treated as if he had put in double digits percentage of the capital because he was doing the dirty work here. So that was available for everyone, any poor person, to come on behalf of the adventurers and do the dirty work for them. All right. And then, of course, you had not sharecropping. I'm sorry. Not debt peonage. That's the negative term for it, and negative form of it. But oh, doggone it, indentured servitude, right? And with indentured servitude, usually it was between 3 to 7 years that you would indenture yourself to an employer. And for those 3 to 7 years, life was tough. They provided your food and clothing and your quarters to live in. They could be as stingy or as generous as they wanted to be. They could employ physical punishment. They could even tell the young women that they could not get pregnant and they could not marry because that would interfere with their working capacity, right? And so they decided if they wanted to allow them to receive any kind of education. So it really was quite despotic and archaic, like from the old ages, this system. But the good news is, right, is after just 3 to 7 years, you're freed, and then you get your freedom dues. And the freedom dues were to include at least a freehold. And a freehold was considered in English political tradition enough land to survive a decade. Okay. So when you exhaust a certain amount of soil and you have to let it lay fallow for about a third of the year, and you got to move on to other land, They're supposed to give you enough land that you could survive off of agriculturally for a decade. So oftentimes that ended up being anywhere from like 40 to 50 acres to almost 100 acres that were supposed to be given to you as freedom dues. You were to get a certain amount of food and provisions, and they were supposed to have taught you some type of trade. So if you wanted to be an artisan, a skilled worker, you could employ yourself in your new skill to make money. All right. So you have people like George Alsop, ALSOP. He became a spokesman for indentured servitude in Maryland. He became very rich and successful, and kind of like doing commercials. He said, "Everybody, look at me. I'm a success story. You could be the next one. Come and become an indentured servant, and the tough phase will not last forever, and you have great opportunities once you're freed at the end of your indenture." And then you had kids like young kids like Richard Frethorn, Frethorne. Frethorn has a famous letter back to his parents, and it's pitiful. He talks about abuse, neglect, practically starving, begging his parents to buy him out of his indenture instead of waiting his 3 to 7 years. And it was pitiful. And when another thing that he mentioned, and supposedly it did happen in large numbers in Virginia, is a lot of people were lied to and were never given their freedom dues when they were done. Okay, that did happen. As a matter of fact, two completely different classes of people began to be kind of identified with the region in which they lived. Okay, so the leaders, right? Many of them were the gentry class, Gentry. And some of these gentrymen, right, whether it was true or not is another story, but they claimed, their lineage went back at least to the Danes or the Norman invasion or even the Romans, that they come from aristocratic blood, they long traditional big landowners, right? And they came, and of course, they had a monopoly and near monopoly back in England at being able to serve in certain political positions, being able to receive monopolistic privileges to trade in the big money makers, just like Spain did. So, like cocoa, sugar, human slaves, and so forth. That was not to be open for everybody. That was a monopolistic privilege. Tea, etc. And then also, they were granted political positions that commoners were not granted. And if I didn't mention it already, they were granted education, and they were very proud of that. They were the educated class out in the outside of the cities in the countryside of England, especially in Sussex. So at any rate, they came over and they were invited by Governor William Berkeley. It's spelled like Berkeley, but for some reason in the Old English, they said it was pronounced Barclay. But Governor William Berkeley, right? He went out of his way writing to the second and third sons of gentrymen, trying to recruit them to come to Virginia, and offering them opportunities at his royal council, which was a political body that served with the governor, offering them the choicest of lands and monopolistic papers to trade in highly lucrative products. And so at any rate, and of course, second and third sons, right? Because like as in Spain, they had primogeniture back in England, where when the gentry father died, the eldest son got everything. So a lot of the second and third sons of gentrymen came here, right? They were accustomed to living the high life back in England. Now their older brother got to have it, and so they're coming to have it here in Virginia. And I have some stats on one coming up, but you could make the argument that they ran the show. They ran the show. They were always, almost without exception, gentrymen were in the council, right? The upper chamber of the colonial or state legislator under the governor. And of course, they happen to be also the majority, although not like 90 something percent as they were in the council. the majority in the House of Burgesses, the House of the lower elected house, right? And notice it's called the House of Burgesses, and a lot of people said that was propaganda, right? Saying this is the house of the bourgeoisie, of the people from the cities, of these parvenus who just become nouveau riche, right? They could control the lower branch, but no, gentrymen pretty much for quite a while controlled the lower and the upper branch of their legislature in Virginia. Okay, so then in addition to that, something like the headright system, right? Um, for every indentured servant that you brought over and employed, right, and you had to take care of for 3 to 7 years, for every indentured servant that you brought, you were granted 50 to 100 extra acres a piece, a person that you brought over. So imagine if you brought hundreds of indentured servants. That's going to add up 50 to 100 acres for each. So at any rate, right, the government settled itself on the east coast of Virginia, and the best land as far as fertility happened to be in the east of Virginia, and it was known as the Tidewater region. So hence the gentrymen became known as the Tidewater elite. Okay. Now those who never received their freedom dues, who came as poor squatters, just to find unoccupied land and just kind of trespass on it, right? They went further west into the frontier, and it was known as the Piedmont, Piedmont. So you have the backcountry Piedmont poor folk who were, despite their poverty, right, they were ambitious. They wanted that American dream. They wanted to rival the gentrymen, etc. And so you have the Piedmont poor, and you have the Tidewater elite on the East Coast. Okay. So what we're saying here, right, on number one, is that there were growing opportunities for the common person in North America. Indentured servitude, coming and serving for adventurers, higher wages and more jobs available. Okay, the ability to squat on land and become at the very least, a subsistence farmer, growing your own food and being independent economically. So you had opportunities, right, that perhaps didn't exist back in England, but, right, that's why we call it kind of capitalism for better and for worse. The gentrymen had a huge leg up over them. And mainly, right, they had it through political capital. And political capital, as opposed to economic capital, is just money to start a business. Political capital are connections. Okay. So at any rate, going on to number two. And by the way, David Hackett Fisher, I get the information of the gentry class running the show from his book. It's called New Albion. Remember, the Greeks called England Albion. It's an interesting book, but a very simple part of his thesis was, right, is the demographic, right, the category of the population that first effectively colonizes or settles an area are going to make that area in their image, right? Pretty simple. So he said Virginia and Maryland were gentry. They were formed by the gentry. They were dominated by the gentry. So not only did the gentry enjoy economic perks and political power, right? But remember the three categories in history. The third category is social, is the gentrymen determined the culture of the South as well. And of course, they were into, and tell me when this sounds familiar with the South, they were into the code of chivalry, right? To be willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, right? Martial glory, being a hero on the military battlefield, hospitality, and having great etiquette and manners and how you treat people that come to your home and your property, loyalty to family and to your local environment. And so, a lot of that which the South is going to, cloak itself in as far as its identity, all the way up to the Civil War, is found here right off the bat. It's made in the gentry image. And get this, I thought this was interesting. He makes the point that the Southern drawl comes from the gentry class in Sussex, England. Okay. And to me, what's funny about that, right, is they were the most educated. They were old wealth. They were like, supposedly very classy and wealthy and all that, right? And it's funny because, sadly, sometimes if you have the Southern drawl, you could be stigmatized as being not very educated, not very intelligent, etc. Now, okay, and so at any rate, the gentrymen made the South in their image. Okay, so capitalism for better and for worse, more opportunities for the poor over here than back in England, but still the opportunity for the rich to have a huge advantage over the poor over here, just as it was in England. Then numbers 2 and 3, we played the blame game. All right, it's kind of just basic historiography. You play the blame game with the English establishment of Jamestown in Virginia, right? So the Powhatan were a confederacy with tens of thousands of warriors and tens of thousands of people, population, right? And as you probably know, there were just scarcely over 100 settlers that first came to Jamestown. Very precarious beginnings, right? But look what it says here. They're ordered by their leaders. Now, they said, as the natives will grow discontented with your habitation, right? Establish an invulnerable fort and do not sell your guns to them. Try not to offend them, but take care of your own, firstly. So to me, right, this is the beginning of the ugly imperialist, right? I'm coming to your home, and I already know that I'm not going to be wanted. I already know that when you realize we're not just there to trade with you, right, and then leave, that we're here to stay and to colonize and settle, right? We know you're going to hate it and you're going to fight us. So right off the bat, we're coming anyway. We don't care if you don't want us. We're coming. We're going to develop an invulnerable fort with an invulnerable facade or front to it, a palisade, right? Those log facades of the forts, and we're going to keep our monopoly on guns. And when it comes to fighting, we like our chances, right? So the English ugly imperialist, and this is of course Helen Roundtree on the test. Okay, when I ask her thesis right here, Helen Roundtree's book. So she definitely adheres, right? Oh heck, I was going to do a color, but anyway, she adheres to conflict history. Okay, whereby she looks for power, domination, competition, and she wants you to empathize with those who lost. In this case, it's the Native Americans. So the sources we have, right? They put together the chronicles of a handful of people. Okay, one is John Smith, but of course, I don't think I need to even tell you. You have to be mindful of the fact of John Smith's his possible motives. And what are the motives of almost any colonizer, right? He's going to want to justify what he does. He's going to want to justify the English taking over Virginia. Okay, so that's important to know with his famous 2 books. Then you had a kid, I kid you not, he was sent as a hostage to the Powhatan, and as a message of goodwill to learn the Powhatan language so he could serve as an interpreter. And his last name was Savage, and of course they called the natives savages. His name was Richard Savage, like a teenage kid. So they sent Richard Savage there, and he put together memoirs and kept somewhat diary. So we have his writings to go from also. Then we have a guy who he didn't really participate in leadership in any capacity, just kind of a common English settler, but he was very thoughtful and well-spoken. And his name was Strahan. I can't remember his first name, but Strahan. So you have writings from Strahan as well. And then, of course, you had Lord Ratcliffe, one of the leaders, a gentleman. Lord Ratcliffe kept a diary as well. Okay, so it's mainly just those writers that we have as a window into this time. Okay, so putting all those together, supposedly the English come in, and right away they are attacked, um, and they shoot off their cannon from their ship, and it breaks a very large tree in half, and it very much psychologically frightens the native tribe of the Chesapeake, and so they stopped attacking. They go past Chesapeake territory and they go into the Paspahegh territory, and the Paspahegh were run by one of the sons of Powhatan, of the great Werewants, the great chief. And so this son tries to, for lack of an interpreter, tries to say, hello, we're the Paspahegh, we're part of the Powhatan Confederacy. What are you doing here? What do you want? Right? And instead, the English put up a cross and claim that that land is theirs. And so the Paspahegh leader's son sends a courier back to his dad and says, "Dad, I don't trust these guys. I think we need to wipe them out." So they go back to their fort, and they began trading through sign language and so forth, right? They began trading with some of the local tribes on the coast for corn and food quite desperately, and they start kind of palisading themselves into the fort, right? Well, on two occasions, Powhatan asked them to come and come to his capital, okay, and express what it is that they want, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, Powhatan is very much interested in keeping them alive for now because he heard of the story of their cannon, and he's very interested in gaining access to that cannon. And what's interesting is not against the English, but against his rival Native American tribes. He was more obsessed with them. So at any rate, it's to no avail. So he says, okay, fine, I'm going to get my more kind of bellicose, more warlike brother. And his name was Opechancanough, a very long spelling. But at any rate, he sends Opechancanough, and Opechancanough, he was less diplomatic and less patient and strategic than his brother. So he comes, right, and once again, John Smith and others have infiltrated other tribes, sub-tribes territory. They're fishing and hunting without permission. And so the brother, Opechancanough, opens fire on them with their weapons, their native weapons, and supposedly kills the entire expedition except for John Smith. Brings John Smith to the capital, and they did a mock ritual in which it looked as if they were going to kill John Smith. John Smith, in his famous account, right, says that a young girl named Pocahontas put her head over his chest and told her father, Powhatan, not to kill him. Anthropologists think that it was a rite of passage, a way of adopting an outsider and testing his courage. And some people think that they weren't ever truly going to kill him. But Powhatan proceeds to tell him, "You are my sub-werewants. You are my sub-chief now, and I want you to bring me back some of those cannon and some of your guns, some of your weapons." Well, John Smith, of course, tells him, "Absolutely, I'm your man," etc., right? And leaves and brings back guns that were defunctory, that did not work. He did it on purpose, and he played dumb about it. But to him, right, he was proud of that because he was saying he had the shrewdness that was necessary to survive. So at any rate, at that point, you have the starving period when the winter comes. And with the starving period, well over half of the Englishmen died of starvation. They contended they couldn't leave the fort because the Native Americans surrounded them and would hit them with arrows if they tried to leave. The Native Americans contended that they did not do such and that they offered them food and wondered why they were closing themselves in and starving themselves in such a way. Also, they were drinking brackish river water with salt water in it, and they were getting very, very sick from that as well. So they got to a very pitiful state, and it's evident in this book that Powhatan could have wiped them out to the last man, and he chose not to. Okay, so at any rate, they gain their strength. They have new ships come in with more settlers, more workers, more soldiers, etc. And before you know it, they start spreading out into other sub-tribes' territory. Well, Powhatan gives them an ultimatum that they're not to move any further inland than they already have. And they broke that ultimatum. And it started the first Powhatan War. And there will be two. Okay? So in this one, right, the English are deceitful, they're ungrateful, they're aggressive and imperialistic. The natives, especially Powhatan as the leader, is very meek and almost too patient, and had his chance to wipe them out and chose not to. Right. Then I thought, my goodness, this, if nothing else, I'm going to write out this book just for the guts of this guy, right? How politically incorrect it was for this guy post 2000 to write Love and Hate at Jamestown. His name's David Price, and he's going to side with the English, and he's going to contend, right, that they were so outnumbered, that there was such a constant stream of threats that they faced, right, that they were very much in need of a quite shrewd and sagacious. Remember, sagacious or sagacity is like street smarts. It's worldly wisdom, right? They're in need of like a very sagacious, almost Machiavellian leader who was willing to do ruthless things at times if they were needed. And of course, that person ended up being his hero, John Smith. So John Smith at first, right, he didn't contribute anything to the funds, so he couldn't be one of the leaders. Lord Ratcliffe, right, and there were a couple others as well that were high-ranking gentlemen, and they were killed quite early. So for one thing, right, what the natives would do is they would come in these canoes. They would offer their goods on the canoe, and they'd ask you to bring your goods on a canoe next to theirs. They would go to your canoe and pick up what they wanted and put it to your face and show you. And then you would do the same to them from their boat, what you liked of theirs. And through sign language, before they established interpreters, you'd try to come to an agreement on what was a fair trade. But supposedly they would sign to the Englishmen, they called them tasantasas, strangers. To the Englishmen, right? They would motion for them to put their guns down and put them in the boat. Well, supposedly John Smith had seen it happen twice, where they did that and they grabbed the guns and they killed the Englishmen. Like it was a trap. So he told Lord Ratcliffe and others, don't fall for it. And he did. And he was caught and he was burned alive at the stake in what was known as the matote ritual that the natives had. So as these lords, right, and by the way, another thing they did is they did not want, despite the directions from their leaders back in England, they did not want to build a palisaded fort. They said it will send the wrong message that we mean war, because it looks too much, like a military fort. And John Smith said, no, they will attack. I'm telling you, don't put your guard down. Well, on two occasions, they weren't prepared and they were attacked. And so you see, as these conflict-ridden events happen, right, they play right into the hands of John Smith, because he could look at the nobles and say, see everybody, I told them, I warned them, they had to be more shrewd, more cynical, more ruthless, etc. Because John Smith, he did not apologize for engaging in extortion. when during the starving time, he went to more than one village and threatened to kill the people in the village if they did not hand over some corn. Okay, and he said it had to be done. So at any rate, this guy has the guts as a contemporary author to make a hero out of John Smith and say, see, he was the first genuine American hero because he earned his stripes. He was a poor nobody when he arrived, but because of his wisdom and even his ruthlessness, the people began to increasingly look to him as their leader, as their true leader. Okay. Then we have, and I know you guys, this one makes me very nervous, but I just feel like this is college. We have to not be afraid to tackle key points of discourse that people debate about. And this is one of them. Okay. So as callous as this sounds, and as, you know, kind of defensive as it sounds, some people contend that racism was not anywhere near the main determining catalyst to us enslaving African Americans, but that it was economics. It was circumstance, profit, economics, and that's that. Well, you can't deny our history of racism, right? Of course not. But what they try to insinuate was that it not only played a minor part initially, right? But that when we established, this is kind of classic Marxist thought, right? Everything revolves around economics and power, is that once they enslaved them, then it became convenient as a tool of control and profit to foment racism. And remember, when you foment a fire, right, there's already a spark there, but you feed it oxygen and make it much worse. So that's what they contend, is that it was mainly economic, and then they fomented racism because it conveniently justified enslaving them, and it kept the poor whites from joining up with the poor blacks, right? In good divide and conquer fashion. It kept them afraid of and hateful of each other through the convenient tool of racism. Okay. Well, what do we have that could possibly defend this economic thesis? Well, for one, right, is they tried alternative sources. They tried Native Americans, and Native Americans, the two stereotypical responses in almost any book you read are that one, they had no white cell immunity to the white man's diseases, and they died in droves from diseases. And two, that they were able to abscond, to run away, and hide themselves within quite a few autonomous Native American civilizations that were still, homogeneously all Native Americans living amongst one another under their own leaders, under their own government, etc. And they could run and join them, right? And you couldn't find them or catch them. So at any rate, the Native American, and not to mention, right, they wanted to trade with the natives and make money off them instead of spending money in costly war. And so they knew that it would only increase the drama if they enslaved the Native Americans, even if it wasn't their tribe and another tribe. They were afraid of doing that. So for various reasons, the option of utilizing Native American labor just didn't seem to work effectively. Okay. So then chronologically, they next tried Englishmen. They tried white men and women, right? Which I've already described as indentured servitude. Okay. When you look especially at Virginia, there are a lot of court cases of breaking property and tools, absconding, running away, stealing something with you. Physical defiance of getting in like fist fights and engaging in physical altercations with their overseer, because the overseers were the hated middleman, right? They didn't, quote, own them for 3 to 7 years like the employer did, but they were hired to extract a certain amount of work for them in a certain short period of time, and they were told to do whatever was necessary to make their work as efficient as possible. So the overseers were oftentimes hated middlemen, and there was a lot of fighting with them. Okay. And then also, right, the people that never received their freedom dues, a lot of them moved to the Piedmont, and then they rose in a rebellion. What they did is they were fighting with the Doeg tribe, and the crown had the nerve, the governor, to say, you guys are fighting in an unauthorized war with the Doeg tribe. We're trying to make peace with them so we could trade with them. If you continue to do so, it'll be considered treason. And of course, treason is tantamount to execution, right? So under a leader named Nathaniel Bacon, these ex-squatters and others illegally fought the Doeg and defeated them. And they knew better than to disband because they could be captured one by one and executed. So they just kept their army intact, and they marched to the East Coast, right? And they fought the actual colonial militia, and they beat them. And Nathaniel Bacon declared a Republic of Virginia, a People's Republic of Virginia, then end to gentry rule, democratic participatory government, land redistribution. This is radical stuff, right? But he gets dysentery and he dies quite suddenly, and the movement falls apart, right? And the argument is, right, is that if you have two people in a menial job, right, and God knows, many of us, I have had menial jobs, a job that has no prestige attached to it. It pays poorly. It often involves arduous physical labor, and there's not much of a future chance of advancement in it, right? So you have two people at a menial job. Let's say one of them is a father of three and he's middle-aged, and he is accompanied by a young man or woman who's taking 2 to 3 classes at the local JC in the evenings after work. If the boss were to come to them, hypothetically, of course, and say, you guys are stuck here for life. I'm just telling both of you, you legally cannot leave this job, right? People would say sometimes that statistically, that young man or woman is going to be the one that is the most irate and reacts in the most rebellious manner. And of course, the difference between the two, right, is supposedly expectations. That young man or woman who's taking college classes, he or she's not doing it just for intellectual enrichment, right? They're taking it to get their degree and to move on to a better job. But the middle-aged guy, maybe he just figures that that's his lot. He's stuck there, and he's made he's okay with it. He's reconciled himself to that fact. So same thing with these white laborers. You could get these indentured servants to come and work for 3 to 7 years, right? But remember, a lot of them have been enticed into doing that by telling them, hey, when your indenture's done, you're going to get all these freedom dues, and the sky will be the limit once you're done with those 3 to 7 years. So their expectations were always high, right? So that's not really a demographic that you want to exploit. A demographic that is expecting life to get much better in the near future. Okay. Now, conversely, right, African slaves, you have evidence of them reaching the ports in the South. The main port was Charleston, South Carolina, or Richmond, Virginia. And that you had physical evidence of them acting as if their lives were over. They've been separated from their families, from their tribes, 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. They don't know the language. They don't know the culture. They don't know anybody. They're in shackles, right, and coffers. And so as far as they know, their life is as good as done. And of course, there was a high rate of suicide on the Middle Passage here, right? So hence, they're already broken. They have no hope. They have no expectations. So they're already ready to be exploited, sadly, cynically. Okay. So then, as you have, right, a rebellion known as Bacon's Rebellion, literally, I don't remember if it was their council or if it was their House of Burgesses, the lower upper house, but one of them literally put in their minutes that these ex-indentured servants, these indentured servants are a volatile labor force. They're ready to explode at any time. They expect too much, right? So hence, right, they need to find someone, a demographic that's more broken, that's more resigned to being exploited. Then at this time, because that was in 1676, from 1650 to 1680, right around this time, they experienced a glut in slaves in the Caribbean. And I hate to use that term glut because you use it with commodities that are not living beings, but still they were seen as chattel or movable property, and legally, and there were more of them than there was demand, ability, desire, willingness to purchase them. So what happens when you have, you know, a higher supply than you do a demand? The price goes down. So what do you know? Right at this time, when you have this big white labor rebellion, the price of slaves plummets. And I think I have some exact stats here somewhere, but at any rate, I kid you not, paying for a white indentured servant, okay, for just 3 to 7 years constituted between 60 and 85% of the cost of purchasing a slave. So think about that, right? You can get a guy for maybe only 3 years who's got high expectations, or you could just spend only 15% more and have a slave for life and the children for life, although they did the children, right, the identity through the mother. Okay. And so it became, I hate to say it, it became a deal. It became a profitable bargain to buy the slave for life at just a little bit higher cost than an indentured servant. All right. Then in addition to that, the Dutch moved from the Netherlands to Brazil to the Caribbean to the American South with all kinds of like middleman resources. They had like sugar production in South Carolina, big money maker, right? The machinery for sugar production, the Dutch provided at discount prices. Loans, right, to purchase the slave. Loans were available by Dutch creditors right away at this time in the mid to late 1600s. And so they helped facilitate everything as well, right? And then in addition to that, the glut lasted for a couple decades because of events back in Africa. Now, supposedly, right, both the rise of empires in Africa and the fall of empires both could and often did result in a higher supply of slaves. That's strange to me how both could, right? So you have the rise of the Dahomey. You have the rise of the Asante. You have the Congolese. You have oh gosh, the Yoruba, the Igbo. You know, all these different empire. I already said the Asante, huh? Yeah. At any rate, but some of them began to fall apart. So the ones that rose, right, they developed this large army, and they would go on raids to capture slaves from other tribes and send them to two infamous trading posts on the Ivory Coast, Elmina and Luanda. Okay. And of course, they wanted European guns, European textiles, jewelry, sugar, alcohol, all kinds of stuff. Okay. In return. But especially they wanted guns, right? Because then if they got a monopoly in their area on guns, then they could really expand their African empire at the expense of their neighbors. So at any rate, the rise of empires caused more slaves to be captured and sold, and hence the price of them to go down. And then also, like I said, the fall of a couple of the empires did the same thing because people saw it was like sharks seeing blood in the water. They're like, okay, now's the right time to attack them. They're falling apart. They're experiencing a civil war, etc. They're ripe for the taking. Let's go take some slaves. So at any rate, it became sadly an economic bargain. Okay. Now I do admit that you have oh, and then another thing here. Las Casas. Now remember this guy from the Black Legend? Remember he was the defender of the Native Americans? He's the one that called them meek sheep. Said that they were, the innocent, childlike victims, and the Spanish royal powers should legally protect them from the Spaniards and from militaristic raids, etc., and war. However, he was asked what to do about the labor scarcity if they did not enslave any longer the Native Americans. And sadly, right, for his great humanitarian record with the natives, he suggested that they use African slaves instead. So that's a huge, kind of stain on his legacy. And what he said, right, is he said they seemed more robust. And of course, with that one, right, is the very controversial contention that people from Africa, especially at the Ivory Coast and other areas on the west coast of Africa, that they had developed a sickle cell trait that was developed as the body's way of developing immunity against the threat of malaria. So hence, when they had some type of white cell defense, they could now, right, the main moneymaker for a long time was sugar. And in sugar, right, you waded waist deep in water, in the humidity, with mosquitoes biting you. And they were not dropping dead from malaria like the Native Americans were. And remember, they cultivated rice. I'm not sure about sugar, but they cultivated rice in the water, in the humidity, with mosquitoes back in Africa. To such an extent, matter of fact, that they were teaching some of their masters how to properly cultivate rice. Okay. So they developed a reputation for being more robust, hardier constitution. So hence they should be used. All right. Then we make the argument, right, that it was economically convenient to establish stereotypes about them. And of course, right, the word that sums up a lot of the negative stereotypes that were developed in the South about African Americans is the word Sambo. Sambo was a very popular protagonist in a lot of the minstrel shows that were played in the South. And of course, it was of a happy-go-lucky, ignorant, lacking self-control, very impulsive African American male. All right. And then, like I said, a divide and rule tactic. Howard Zinn, in his book, he has evidence, especially with leisure time. Okay. People have been people, they worked their bottoms off during the day, and they had taverns and inns and so forth, right, in the evening to go drink and dance and be entertained. And supposedly in these places of ill repute and poor Southerners, there was a lot of camaraderie and even miscegenation, even interethnic sex between poor whites and blacks. And there's evidence that the gentrymen and a lot of the Southern rulers were frightened by that prospect and wanted to encourage dividing them by way of racism. Then, however, on the next one, I pull a 180 and I show how there is evidence of of racism coming here from the beginning. Okay. And not just from the beginning, right? But that it was deliberately propagated as well and encouraged by some of the colonial leaders. So when you look at this list of those that said horrible things about the sub-Saharan Africans, right? Because as you know, right, beneath the Sahara Desert, you have the Bantu speaking people first, and they're connected to Black Africans to this day, to the origin of them. North of the Sahara Desert, it gets a lot more, it gets a lot different. You have the Berbers and the Carthaginians, the Arabs, etc. So we're talking about sub-Saharan Africans, right? Black Africans. Aristotle, right? He had already had a theory on natural slaves. He said that God and nature had created some races of people, not just individuals, but races. He said, right, or the equivalent thereof in the Greek language. That he created certain, quote, races to be physically gifted but intellectually lacking, right? And so with those hardy bodies and the weak minds, they were, quote, natural slaves. They were meant to be someone's slaves, as opposed to other races of people who had a much finer culture creating capacity, much more innate intelligence, that were meant to be their masters. He also had a climate theory that not only with heat, but with humidity, it innervates the mind, it innervates the body, and it brings out the worst in people, and that you're going to have some of the laziest, and that just cracks me up, right? They did the same thing in the West later on in U.S. history with Latinos, right? The lazy Mexican, but yet they wanted the Mexicans to work for them, right? And so stereotypes oftentimes are riddled with contradictions. So at any rate, this is no different. So at any rate, Aristotle, right? Ethiopians, right? That very word in the Greek meant burnt faces. He said that, just ignorant bad stuff from Aristotle. And then you go forward, right? Let's go to let's see here. Medieval Arabic Muslim chroniclers. They perpetuated it. Ibn Khaldun, right? Sub-Saharan Africans were like dumb animals, naturally submissive to slavery as they remained remote from civilization. Portugal, Gomez Yanez de Gerara, seemed to suggest innate African inferiority while calling for their evangelization to become Christian. He likened the dark complexion of their faces to creatures burnt in hell. See, just awful, ignorant stuff. Ignorance of morality. Africans living in bestial sloth. And by the way, if you want to look in the history of racism in the U.S., this is the new guy, okay? This is, I think he might be, he's probably younger than I am. And he's like an Ivy League teacher, Ibram Kendi. Take a look at his works. I worked from 2 of his books on this section. Okay. Leo Africanus. This Moroccan's 1526 treatise aroused European fears of Africans' alleged hypersexuality, their destitution of reason, and their bestial behavior. And then look down here. In 1578, English writer George Best added to this amalgamated awful caricature of Africans. He suggested that Africans' alleged ancestor, Ham, in the Bible, who was biblically cursed by God, right? As you guys may be familiar with that, I think it's in the book of Genesis. Their 3 sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham of Noah, right? When they're on that boat, and Noah gets drunk, and he becomes naked and hungover, and Ham kind of laughs as a younger brother at his own dad, and he shows the 2 brothers to the dad to like look at him at his nakedness, which was a great disgrace. So the dad is furious, Noah, and he declares a curse on Ham, that the descendants of his 2 brothers will be the masters of his descendants, and his descendants will be slaves, right? And at any rate, Ham, they go in their three different directions after the flood, and the South is going to run with this, you guys, all the way up to the Civil War, and they're going to contend that the descendants of Ham are Africans. So hence, even the Christian God wants them enslaved. All right. Virginia legislator John Corey chose to translate and publicize Leo Africanus's racist work. Okay. And then now we know early on that racism existed through the legal channels. In 1630, a white man named Hugh Davis was publicly whipped for abusing himself to the dishonor of God and shame of Christians by defiling his body and lying with a Negro woman. Exactly 10 years later, another incident of a white man getting a black woman pregnant resulted in punishment for both parties, this time the whip for the black woman. Then you have Antonio the Negro Johnson, or Anthony Johnson. Okay. But literally in the legal files, it says Antonio the Negro. This guy, right, somehow broke free as a black man from his slavery, became a slave owner himself, and became very successful and well-to-do and rich. He owned vast property, not only in Virginia, but in Maryland. During the holiday season, he left Virginia for his home in Maryland to visit family. When he came back to his home in Virginia, they had confiscated his property. He said, "What have I done? I'm not derelict on paying my property taxes. I haven't committed a crime. You have no right to confiscate this property." And they made it very clear. We don't deem it appropriate here in Virginia for a man of your skin color to own land and servants. So these cases, right? I mean, they're just kind of transparent. That it was absolute racism. It was racial discrimination. And they didn't even try to hide it. Then you had a case of rape with a man just simply known by a first name of Arthur. And he was black. And he raped a white woman. And he was hanged for it. And there were cases of other people, of white men who had raped, and they were punished, but not killed. Okay. And then, of course, somewhere on here, I should have the story of John Punch. John Punch and two other indentured servants ran away before their indenture was finished, and they were captured. The two companions, they had what was left of their indenture doubled as punishment, and John Punch was sentenced to labor for life. And they made it very clear. The only difference was his skin color, because he was black and the other two were white. Right, so the colonization of North America yielded the intrusion of old ideas regarding either environmental or biological justification for demeaning people of color. This cultural and psychological impediment, unfortunately, still yields residue today. All right, so then African American Agency in South Carolina. It's called Black Majority by Peter Wood. Very simple thesis, okay? Is there developed high demand for labor in certain areas, and the African slaves were the only ones willing to do it. And so in doing so, in sensing their leverage and being the only ones willing to do a desperately needed job, they made demands. And oftentimes they received them. Okay. So the jobs were hunting panthers. They're like the Carolina Panthers. There really was some species of panther in the Carolinas. And you also have the slave trade amongst the Native Americans. The tribes that were allied with the French were capturing tribes that were allied with the British, as well as British colonists, and selling them as slaves in the Caribbean. And people were scared to death, and they wanted someone to fight against these slave traffickers. And they actually were willing, just as with the Panthers, to give guns to these slaves to do the job. And then another one that made them good money was the tar and pitch industry. The tar and pitch, right, was used as the glue, the adhesive to put ships together for lack of nails. And they made it from the sap of a tree. And the process supposedly was very messy, very hot, and could burn your skin off. And it was very disagreeable labor. And the slaves alone seemed to be willing to do it. And they made demands in return. So a lot of them were paid well enough that once they received the value of their market value, they could buy their own freedom, which was called manumission. Okay. Some of them agreed to half freedom terms, like the Dutch did in New York. And they would, like, for certain parts of the year, they got to live independently with their own families. And then certain parts of the year, they had to show up and do a certain amount of labor for the master. So there was a variety of concessions that they received, not just simply being freed, but they were always better than what they had before, right? Whatever they received. And they received it because they demanded it, because they knew there was a great need for their labor. Okay. And then number 7, agency with the Native Americans. Just the Native Americans, when you read this, right, it almost is derogatory of the Native Americans. They would make a deal with the French, right? And then when the French were beginning more and more desperate and weak, they would demand new terms. And the French were like, wait a minute, no, we already agreed on these terms, right? And they're like, too bad, you need us. We'll abandon you at your time of need if you don't increase what you offer us. And so, you know, some of these, it almost makes the natives look unethical in this book. But remember, if you're a Native American, you don't like the condescending conflict history of them just being meek sheep who were victimized in history. And so you like the fact, right, that they made decisions too, that they had power too, etc. And so it's really that simple. They're going to take advantage of the French because the French did not bring enough resources here. Not enough soldiers, not enough farmers to grow food, not enough merchants to trade, etc. Right. So we're getting close to 2 hours. As a matter of fact, the few of you that are left, I'm going to give you more points than everybody else. So I really appreciate you. But yeah, this might be literally the longest I've ever done on a Zoom. We're getting close to 2 hours, but it's just it's a lot of stuff. Anyway, French Louisiana, fluid by accident. A very simple thesis, okay, is once again, because the French did not bring enough resources here to command their will, right? Enough soldiers, enough officials, enough farmers to grow food, enough artisans to develop products that were in demand, enough merchants to trade, etc. Right? Because they didn't bring enough resources in the situation they were in, almost kind of organically, right? Like a growing plant, opportunities arose, freedoms arose for the French colonists that were never truly intended for them at the beginning. Okay. So, for instance, right, they were not getting the supplies they needed and wanted from France. So they started trading with like Jean Lafitte, the famous pirate. They started trading with the English enemy and others, right? They smuggled. And you have actually a letter from a governor of French Louisiana, and he's telling the French government, if you guys don't bring in commodities within the next certain number of months, I am going to openly allow smuggling because we're that desperate for products and you're starving us here. Okay. So at any rate, so with trade, right, and with economics, people didn't need the official paperwork to become an artisan in whatever trade they wanted to be, right? They didn't need the proper paperwork to be a merchant and buy a product here and sell it over there, right? Because they were in desperation. They needed almost anybody to do it. But in old school France, right, they were mercantilist, they were pro-crown, they were pro-aristocracy. They weren't for anything that approximated capitalism, like an open economy for all to be able to rise up and do what they wish economically. And then also, right, the men married and procreated with whom they wanted. They tried on 2 occasions to bring in French brides, mail order brides, and it just did not work well either time. And so they had kids with Black women, with indigenous women, etc. All right. And what was another instance of like flux of movement? It was mainly economic. Okay. And like I said, also with marriage proposals and so forth. So you pretty much got to do what you wanted to do in French Louisiana. And by the way, it started in 1717. They're a little bit later than the English, right? But again, they didn't bring enough commodities, enough food, enough soldiers to impose their will and keep it like old school, like they wanted back in France, like very aristocratic. Because the Creoles, right? The Creoles were those of French blood, but born here in the Americas. They were very arrogant against the commoners, right? I mean, look at this. They called them, I don't know French, but from my knowledge of Spanish, I know that's got to mean little people. They called the poor commoners little people. So the Creoles had these old school, prejudices and assumptions, but they just couldn't impose their will. They could not impose their will. And so instead, people kind of did as they pleased. And French Louisiana became very fluid. People marrying whom they wanted, doing what they wanted economically for a living. And kind of begrudgingly, the French Creole leaders just let them do it. Okay? So let me put stars by your names, those of you who are still here, okay? I really appreciate you. Right. All right, great. You guys will get extra points, I promise. Okay? So thank you so much for sticking around, okay? I wish you guys well. I hope that helped.
Thank you.
Thank you, okay? Have a good week.
Thanks a lot. That whole lesson was very clear and concise. It's the best I've heard that topic explained.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that more than you know. Thank you. All right, Jacob, Caleb, you guys, Alexis, you guys have a great week, okay? Thank
You
you.
too.
Thank you.
All right.
You have a good week too.
What?